move on to the next item, which is post-Hurricane Ian water quality dashboard. Dr. Miles Medina of the University of Florida Center for Coastal Solutions is joining us virtually to present on a centralized web-based visualization dashboard that shows collaborative data collected by CHNEP and its members and partners. This relates to Public Engagement Action 2 to expand reach of education and engagement opportunities to new targeted audiences, and Fish and Wildlife and Habitat Protection Action 1, protect, restore, and monitor estuarine habitats. So I'd like to now turn this over to Dr. Medina for the presentation.
All right, hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm Dr. Miles Medina from the Center for Coastal Solutions at UF. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll just describe the water quality dashboard that we quickly developed soon after Ian to help facilitate coordination and kind of real-time understanding of what was unfolding with water quality in the area. So next slide. So just to start on a personal note, I grew up in Miami in the 80s and 90s, and it seemed like every summer, you know, hurricanes were just like a thing that you had to deal with as a kid. And the big one in my life was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. And of course, you know, very disruptive, but like with hurricanes in general, when I was growing up, I mean, one of the sort of silver linings was always the coming together of people, you know, and a sense of community that emerged in response to these big events, neighbors, co-workers, family, friends, even strangers helping each other to rebuild and get their lives back together. And, you know, it's always kind of heartwarming after an event like that. So next slide. And the reason I bring it up is that even though after an event like Ian, there's, you know, so much devastation and everything. And in terms of data and the scientific response, there's often this kind of period that's like a black box where equipment and personnel are unavailable, and so you have less of a clear picture of exactly what's going on. After Ian, there was this very impressive response and coordination across different groups throughout the state, local partners there, CHNEP and SCCF and so on, but also, you know, folks like us from UF coming together and help with the scientific response. And this, you know, sharing of data and information that emerged after the event, I think was very valuable. It just facilitated a shared understanding of unfolding conditions in real time and the development of shared messaging around things like water safety and bacteria that Nicole and Jennifer just discussed. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the timeline right after the storm. Of course, the hurricane hit the area on September 28th. The very next morning, the Center for Coastal Solutions at UF, we held a research response call. We knew that because we had been outside of the storm's path, you know, whereas local groups, you know, had equipment and things knocked offline, we knew that we would have some resources that we could deploy fairly quickly out there, especially because many of us faculty and labs at UF operate in the area, or we're operating in the area already. So we kind of, you know, figured out what resources were there, what we could deploy quickly, coordinated with CHNEP and others to make that happen. And also the following week, we started organizing and hosting these weekly coordination calls with a lot of different people involved, as you see listed on the slide. And this just brought together a bunch of expertise, you know, different kinds of experts, from water quality and hydrology people to different kinds of biologists and so on, to share perspectives and understanding of what was going on in real time. And so this involved people that were out in the field regularly, other people that maybe were further away, but, you know, we're looking at the data or working in labs and so on. It's just really interesting as a scientist, but also, you know, really valuable in terms of responding to things in real time. Okay, let's have the next slide. So one of the things that emerged out of one of these early calls was a need for something like what we ultimately developed, this kind of real-time dashboard. So Brandon Moody at Charlotte County had put together this Esri, or kind of map-based dashboard to display some of the data that were coming out. from around the area of water quality data. And he said, you know, this is nice, but it'd be nice if, like, in addition to a map, we had also, we can visualize the data, you know, throw up some charts and see what's going on with oxygen, nutrients, and bacteria, and so on. So I got together with Brandon, and we quickly, you know, developed a kind of impromptu, sort of quick and dirty system for Brandon would request data from all the different groups that were collecting data in the area. And CHNEP had a big part, of course, in coordinating these sampling efforts across groups. And then Brandon would send me the data. I'd do some basic cleaning on the data. Spent a few days just developing a dashboard that we could put those data into, and then update it, you know, as often as we got new data to share with partners to facilitate sampling coordination. So understand where there are gaps, where we need more data. And then, of course, also to understand what the conditions were and as close to real time as possible. So this is really a different kind of approach or sort of use case for water quality dashboards and visualization than your typical dashboard. So typically when you think of water quality dashboard, you know, the data are highly vetted before they get shared. And that means that there's a substantial delay, sometimes months or maybe even a year before those data can actually be visualized. Here, the emphasis was on speed, of course. We're in an emergency situation, and people, you know, in the scientific and sort of management community need to know what's going on as soon as possible. So, of course, you know, the data aren't perfect. It's provisional. It's going to require further vetting before it gets pushed to like a public dashboard. But at least, you know, there's access to some level of information in as close to real time as possible. And as discussed just a few minutes ago, of course, there were some delays. You know, the lab capacity was, people were bumping up against lab capacity. So sometimes there was a delay of a week or two before samples were analyzed and the data were available. But, you know, at least we're getting a picture in as close to real time as possible with this kind of thing. So on the next slide, we can see a snapshot of what this dashboard looked like. So on the upper left, the user has some options. They can select a location, a water quality parameter. In this case, dissolved oxygen concentration is selected. And then there's a date slider that you can use to narrow the time range. So based on those selections, you'll have a map that shows where the data are available. You can click locations on the map, and then that adjusts on the upper right, the data that are displayed in a time plot, so you can see how things have evolved over time. And then at the bottom right, there's a histogram. So this is showing basically the distribution of data each week across the entire area. So in this case, it's dissolved oxygen concentration on a particular week. And there's a little play button there. So if you hit play, it goes from week to week in order, and you can see how the distribution of data evolves from week to week. So I'll provide a link to this at the end if anyone's interested in going and playing around with it. And if you do, you'll notice if you spend a few minutes on there that, you know, it's a little bit buggy. There's plenty left, you know, to be desired. Like I said, this was developed really quickly. And so there's some functionality, some ideas that we have for how to make this even more useful, like being able to select multiple locations at once, and displaying data at different depths, for example, oxygen at different depths in the water column. But, you know, it served the purpose. It was useful. And I think with further development, it could continue to be useful into the future if folks are interested in this kind of tool. Okay, next slide. So in terms of what the data told us, of course, you know, I think rigorous analysis is kind of ongoing and results are pending. One thing I'm interested in is personally is and plan to start working on fairly soon is comparing water quality conditions in the immediate aftermath of Ian compared to historical baselines and also compared to other major disturbances like Hurricane Charlie or El Nino events. And some things we noticed just kind of anecdotally and just in the data so far are, you know, of course, we had a lot of oxygen demand, a lot of organic material and stuff flowing into the water as the landscape drained over the following weeks. And so you had a lot of hypoxia, a lot of low oxygen conditions spread out in different areas. Fecal coliform and other bacteria, the levels were alarmingly high for quite a while, as we were discussing just a few minutes ago. And then there was also a red tide plume that kind of blew in from the Gulf soon after the storm, and it's possible that the nutrient plumes and things coming off the landscape after the hurricane might have exacerbated that that bloom. So all things that we can look into and try to better understand with based on the data that were collected right after the storm, and put that in a historical context. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of, I think it sounds like there's a good amount of interest in this kind of dashboard, which serves a very different purpose than the typical dashboard. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, for one, I think there's a clear need to have infrastructure in place for this kind of data pipeline, from data collection to ultimately dissemination to management and managers and scientists and so on. And it's an infrastructure that, if designed properly, can be activated and deployed very quickly. So, we just developed it on the fly after this event. But if you think about, having this in place for, the next time there's some kind of event like this, then it's sort of ready to go and further developed with more functionality. Giving this some thought, it's one thing to say that it would be nice to have this in an emergency situation, and I think that that's important. But it's sort of like, by analogy, like a generator, right? So if you have a generator at home, maybe you bought this right before hurricanes, several years ago. And if you're like a lot of people, if you're like me, after the hurricane, it kind of sits in the garage for a few years. And the next time you need it, you have trouble starting it, right? Because the gas gets gunked up and it hasn't really been maintained. And so I think there's an argument to be made that to have this thing ready and deployable in an emergency situation, it makes sense to continue using it routinely under normal circumstances. And there's actually, quite a bit of benefit there. I think the coordination that this kind of tool can offer just in normal circumstances, getting that shared understanding and sharing of data to be just part of how things are done, I think is really valuable. And then when you need it in a hurricane or emergency situation, it's ready to go because the process is already, people are already used to it. And this isn't something that's particularly technically challenging. I think if folks are really interested in doing this, it's really more about people and rather than data or technical things. So, we'd have to consider how to fund something like this. There would be sort of capital costs involved in the initial development, and then kind of ongoing, operational costs for the routine use and maintenance. And, I don't know what kind of funding model would be appropriate, but maybe some kind of consortium of all the different organizations that would be contributing data to this and then using those data and having access to them. Another important feature that I want to emphasize that wasn't implemented in the current dashboard is we could have a separate area of the dashboard where different groups could sort of upload their schedule for where they're going to sample. So, for example, if you're a CCF and you look at the map and you say, well, actually, let's use another example. Let's say you're one of the counties, Charlotte County, for example, and SCCF, I know personally they do trips routinely up and down the Caloosahatchee River. So that can be displayed on a map, and maybe they have particular points on the map that they know they're going to visit, or maybe it's just a polygon, like a general area. But that schedule could be visualized, and then if you're a different group, like a county or whoever, you can see, oh, okay, these folks are going to be over here, this other group's going to be over there. So we can coordinate and see, kind of fill the monitoring gap based on what other people are doing. So I think that's another kind of easy thing to work into this kind of dashboard. So I believe that's my last slide. Let's see. Yep. So here's my information if anyone's interested in any more detail. And this is a link to the dashboard. As I said, very quick and dirty implementation, not something that, you know, we put forward as a finished product, but it'll at least give you an idea, a flavor of what's possible. So with that, happy to take any questions or just look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Dr. Medina, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for putting your contact information up there so folks can reach out directly if they have follow-up questions. I would like to leave room if there is any urgent question that anybody has to offer that opportunity now.
I'll just ask what everybody's been asking me. Is it safe to go swimming right now?
Did you hear that question, Dr. Medina? Is it safe to go swimming right now?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, honestly. So this dashboard, we haven't updated it since December. This kind of like you know, had a limited sort of time horizon. I think there's probably folks in the room that are more familiar with the current conditions, so I wouldn't want to venture a guess there.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in to say that like there's a lag that we also run into, like with getting the results back from the lab and getting those integrated into a tool like this. So there is unfortunately, you know, nothing that can give us like real time up to the moment. But I will say that as part of the CHNEP Water Atlas, we have a coastal conditions mapper, and we also have water quality information for all of the water bodies in the CHNEP area that can be accessed publicly, where we take all of the publicly accessible data up to the latest available, and we put it online in one place so that people can see, you know, basically is there anything being reported in that waterway that would give me cause to not want to go recreate there this weekend? You know, is there a harmful algae bloom? Is there high bacteria levels? Anything that we are gathering from the wider sampling community, we try to integrate and put in one place. And we're working this year to continually redevelop that site to be more user-friendly. So our hope is to get closer to what you're asking for and to be able to have a place to point people where they can readily access that kind of information.
All right, thank you. And again, thank you, Dr. Medina.